Hey Casey,
Hey,
amazing to see
Casey.
you.
Nice to see you.
Wow, that's really, really cool to see you. My goodness, I'm a bit excited. So, yeah, I think Martin, thank you so much for giving this talk. It was super, super inspiring, and I'm looking forward to speak to you in the next days. And now I have some questions for the creative processing, right?
As you
Thank
wish.
you.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool.
Martin, nice to see you.
Yeah, Casey, how has your day started? You're in Los Angeles right now, right?
Yes. It's around 10 a.m. here.
Okay,
Yeah, I'm in
cool.
the studio. This morning I missed the stream. I missed the start of the stream. I was like with my kids, taking care of family life, that kind of thing. Now I'm in processing mode.
Wow, cool. Super amazing. So, and you have a workshop later on. So, you teach as a professor at MIT, is that right?
Oh, that's not right. I teach
Okay.
at UCLA as a professor.
UCLA, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I just mixed
Oh,
these
it's
things up.
totally fine. But processing was born at MIT when Ben Fry and I were both graduate students there.
Yeah,
Back in 2001.
yeah, sure. So, I'm super excited about the release of Processing 4. To be honest, I was looking for this since a few months already because teaching became a little bit difficult because Apple just released a Big Sur update and it just crashed when we went to 3D mode. So I just felt like many people were a little bit concerned about the further development of processing. And now you just released that amazing new website, the amazing new update, and it just looks like boom, like I'm so happy about this. So
So,
amazing.
yeah, we've been really slamming. Um, and we've released a few alpha releases over the last many months, but this beta one is the first one that's been the default download, which has always been a part of our process. So
Yeah.
I guess I'm hoping that people can really bang away on it as a beta so that we can get everything up and running well for like the 4.0 release.
Yeah,
But
of
yeah, I
course.
mean, all the changes with Apple have really been the thorn in our a deep thorn in our side with needing to update it.
Yeah, I totally understand. Yep. So, but I guess this is the best signal you could send to the community. Everybody loves it. Everything I hear from people is like Crossing 4 is killing, and it's really, really nice to see the progress. It's really awesome. So, I've
Awesome.
got a few questions here from friends and um, Niels Poldevord, the co-author of Generative Design with P5JS, the book about no generative Gestaltung for the web,
Exactly.
generative.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Exactly.
yeah, yeah.
So I was chatting with him, and we were just collecting some questions for you, Casey. And one of them is, what is your vision on the future of computational creativity, and what role could the Processing Foundation and their tools play in that? It's a hard one, I guess.
Yeah, it really is. I think one thing I wanted to say was that, the original generative gestaltung book for me was a milestone in the history of processing. It was the book that I think I'd wanted to see, and here it was. It's
Yeah,
such an extraordinary publication, and to see it translated in so many languages and then make its way into English was just really a thrill. I think Ben and I both come originally from the design world. We both studied that as undergraduates, and we kind of got into the MIT mode and way of doing things. And I feel like the generative design book was the first book really that was made for the visual design communities. Um, it's a hard question to answer, and I think we've been thinking about it for 20 years. I mean, one thing we've been thinking a lot about lately is the language that processing is written on top of. Right now, it's of course written on top of Java. We were just recently rereading some release notes all the way back from like 20 years ago. It was almost written on top of Python rather than on top of Java at that time, 20 years ago. But at that time, Java applets and the web were so completely compatible. It was so nice to be able to just say export for web, throw it up on a server, and you could share the work with anybody with a connection. And so
sure.
that was really the Java reason. And at that time, Java was also more performative as well, ran faster. But I think one of the futures is new languages. For me, new languages are new ways of thinking. I think all of these semicolon languages, braces languages that we often use are like one path to computation, and I think they close off other ways for the mind to be free and to make other kinds of things. So I think processing continuing to be used in other programming languages and environments. I think we're working on like a native Python version now, and other people are experimenting with Swift and other things. I think that's an exciting future, is like breaking the way of thinking out of processing and Java version, really having it working across a different set of platforms.
That's really interesting. So that's basically what P5.js does, right? It's the principles of processing converted to JavaScript and porting this whole, let's say, ecosystem of principles to other languages. Sounds like an amazing idea, because it's super easy for people just to jump on other languages, right, and use it in different contexts and stuff, which is super powerful, I guess.
Yeah. And for me, the difference, or I think what makes processing, or I could say maybe the essence of processing, is not processing Java. It's really about learning to code and thinking about code with visuals at the forefront, because the decades of history of programming languages prior put text and numbers at the forefront. But we're thinking about all the same things. We're thinking about structures and systems and how to break thought down into small pieces, and that enables for emergence and all these exciting ideas that can translate into exciting images and create meaning. And I think that the visual emphasis is really what processing's been about the whole time. And the other thing is the sketching. I don't think we're done with the idea of sketching with code. And I don't think that processing is the end. It shouldn't be the end of that. There should be a lot of other amazing experiments on top of that. I think one thing I've been wanting for a long time is a way of moving directly and immediately back and forth between node mode and text mode. There's been some experiments in there, and of course you can like embed JavaScript in different node programming languages, but I really just want like a one-to-one translation back and forth.
Wow.
And then also live coding, live programming too. Of course, there are a lot of scripting languages that you can program in live, and processing has a mode that lets you tweak things. But I think things being really quick and real time and being able to do them in a live way is another thing I've been wanting for the last 20 years and haven't found yet in a way that works for me.
Sounds amazing, because it's very compatible with this Twitch, YouTube live culture, right? People streaming how they code, and yeah, that's really cool. Would love to see that, right? Also, that node and code switch would be amazing. Wow.
I mean,
Okay,
this
cool.
is like another like super small thing. I think there's always been a lot of opportunity to go back and forth between the blocks, which is this like the Scratch coding environment, and text-based coding environment, because they're so directly one-to-one and compatible. And there have been experiments with that over the years, but I think there's so many young people that are learning to code and think about computation through Scratch but there hasn't really been a good bridge from Scratch world to text-based coding world. And I think that would be something else would be extraordinary to see in a robust way.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. I'm looking forward for that. Really cool. Okay, I've got another question for you. So another one that I've just came up with, Niels Poldervort. Is P5 very similar in its API because it's the best, or simply because it makes processing knowledge transferable? I guess you already answered this in the last question, right? So I guess P5 is the first, let's say, derivative of processing, and there will be future derivatives like the Python mode, or Python is also up, in Android mode is also up. So yeah.
Yeah, there's actually a lot more as well. And I'm not going to remember right now because a lot of them go back quite far. But I think there's a Clojure version of processing. I don't know much about Clojure. I think it's more of like a Lispy way of programming, as far as I know. Carsten Schmidt, Toxie, who is such an essential community member in the early mid days of processing, is really an advocate for Clojure. CoffeeScript. Before P5.js, there was processing.js, which was a literal port of the processing syntax, but it compiled, or a regular expression sort of turned it in so it could run through JavaScript. And I know there's been others too. I can't remember them right now. Yeah. But I mean, P5 deviates from processing in some interesting ways, especially when you get into 3D world.
Yep.
And yeah, I'm excited for a lot more of that.
Me too. Absolutely.
Sorry. Another huge one was Ruby,
Ruby.
Ruby
Okay.
processing. And that was started, I think, by Jeremy Ashenkas or Ashnikosh. I'm sorry if you're, I can't remember. And then it's been picked up into by someone else whose name I also can't remember. And I really feel terrible about that. But yeah, Ruby processing and then the thing that derived from that has been also a great port.
Wow. I didn't know about that. It's really cool. Yeah, that's great. I've got a question as an educator, because I know that you also teach people to cope with processing, right?
Yeah, that's all the time.
Okay,
Mhm.
cool.
And I teach
So,
beginners, like 19, 20 year olds. It's for almost all of them, it's their first experience coding. It's a required class at UCLA in our design media arts major. So a lot of them are maybe nervous about it or not that interested in it. And that's, yeah, I've been doing that for about 17 years now here at UCLA.
okay, what did you learn in these 17 years and how does it work? I mean, well, the background is that I do that as well, and I also
Yeah,
teach
yeah,
at
yeah, yeah.
universities. And when I teach students in universities, especially with a graphic design background, I feel like they have this fear of touching code, right? Many of them. I really have to put a lot of effort into my teaching and really, let's say, tell them a lot about the philosophy and the story and why is it important. Many of them don't understand this, right? And I would like to know how you approach your teaching.
Yeah. Um, we have tried to have and have successfully had a few like sort of like conferences and convergences around this over the years. And I think it happens a lot informally through sharing syllabi and sharing projects. And, you know, Tiga Brain and Golan Levin's recent book
Yeah, it's
is a
great.
way of like compiling a lot of that knowledge together. Um, I love seeing other people's exercise and assignments that are really clever and creative, and I oftentimes adapt them and utilize those in my class with my students. I think in general, I've had an arc over time of teaching more code to teaching less code over like a 10-year period, where I try and like spend less time lecturing about the different pieces of the language and more time really trying to focus on what you can do with a smaller subset. And for me, that was like a transition because processing didn't exist when I was learning how to code. I had to transition from the computer science curricula that I suffered through into the way that I really wanted to be teaching. And it really took years for me to move away from like the code first approach and method. But I think the thing that I do right now that I'm most excited about is spending more and more class time on workshops. Like learn this stuff, read this stuff before we get to class. And in the United States, we call that a flipped classroom. Um, I assign videos and text because students learn a little bit differently. I do like the quickest, most concise introduction that I can. Try and keep it simple. I don't try and cover everything in the books. And then we spend all class making things. Like I try and really find a good prompt and let's build stuff together. And myself and my teaching assistant, we can move around and just help people when they need it. Um, that's really been what's lost for me in the pandemic is that like immediacy of being in a room within people,
Yeah.
a room with other people and being able to just sit next to somebody and talk through things. That's my general approach at the moment, as evolved over some years.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I saw that you just launched an NFT platform called Fatal. Let me just look that up again. Or maybe you can tell me what is the name again?
Feral
Fatal
file.
Feral File. Okay.
So
So
it's all
tell us a little bit about it.
feral is like a wild creature, you know, something that maybe was domesticated and then has sort of gone off into the wild. So it's sort of like, but yeah, feral file is first and foremost, it's an online gallery that's, you know, open 24/7. We have a lot of different group shows. Every show starts with a curator. So we'll invite a curator, the curator will invite the artists, and each show has been between like 6 and 10 different artists. They all will release one project as a large edition. So an edition of 75 or something like that. And then the artists all trade editions, they swap them. So if there's 10 artists in the show, 10 of those editions go to the other artists, and then the editions that are left over can be collected. And we put a really high priority on the artist rights and the collector rights, and really spell that out with a lot of clarity. Like when someone collects the work, what kind of rights does the artist grant them for that? And we started that. My collaborators with that are a blockchain company called Bitmark in June of 2020, and we launched the platform in March of 2021. And we've had 4 shows so far, and I think we're going to have about 2 shows a month all the way through the end of the year. It's been a tremendous amount of energy. And the first show, Social Codes, that I curated, had a lot of artists who were working with processing, and I think like 8 of the 10 works were made with P5. A lot of them were made with processing and then ported to P5. But that was really a thrill. It was really exciting to have those works there. I think a lot of the platforms that have been selling art editions for a long time focus on video, they focus on image, and the whole reason I started Feral File was to be able to allow for software editions to be available. And of course, since we started Feral File, art blocks and a lot of other platforms are coming online. And this way of being able to exhibit generative work, live code. I'm obsessed with live code running through a browser. I think it's an exciting moment for this whole community.
Absolutely. I mean, artworks that are interactive that's a super cool format. I love that. And I saw that website and I thought, okay, wow, this looks really slick and well thought also. I really like the design as well. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to see what's happening there in the future.
Yeah. Thanks. I think one thing that's just related to that, maybe if the question doesn't come up naturally, is the Hic Nunc platform that so many like old school, early processing community members and creators and advocates have moved over to that platform. And there's such a tremendous energy around releasing code-based objects there. That's been a very, I think, exciting development in the last few months too.
Absolutely. So I saw some of my friends who just started with NFTs, also at Hic Nunc. I think I've read that name anywhere, and they just made so much money with it. It was just crazy, right? So it's really booming so much. It's really, really crazy. It's a good opportunity for artists too.
There's a darkness there, but there's also an opportunity too.
Yeah.
I think one thing about Hic Nunc that I really respond to is it feels very supportive, and the platform assumes that you are a collector and a creator. That's sort of the default that it has. And so many artists are collecting each other's work and supporting each other's work. And I think, there just haven't been opportunities for people who make creative code-based work, generative code, to be able to have any income from that. And I have very much mixed minds about it. The early days were beautiful. Posting things online, sharing them, just freely sharing in the way that the early web from the 90s was such a beautiful place for that and experimentation. But having your passion in life to be something you only can do after you finish your workday, you can only do from like 8 p.m. until 2 a.m. in the morning. I think it's wonderful for people to be able to have the opportunity to sort of focus more of their time and energy on the thing they love to do. And it's possible that NFTs might allow more people to do that. I think I sometimes suffer for being overly optimistic about a lot of things.
Okay.
that's a subject maybe for some other thing.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So I'm a little bit hesitant still because I'm not really into let's say the consequences for the climate, and that's something I'm sometimes a little bit concerned about when I read about blockchain. And yeah, but I'm also thinking about, is that a good thing? And I'm still not having an answer for myself yet. But
yeah. Maybe just like super quick on on that one is that the Ethereum blockchain does have a huge environmental impact. The reason a lot of the artists working with code went over to Hic Nunc, which is on the Tezos blockchain, is that it's a totally different blockchain system, and I think it has an environmental impact around the size of Twitter, or like minting is around the environmental impact of a tweet. So it's a very different, like it's like everything. All blockchains are different platforms, different systems, and they have different kinds of environmental and social impact. But
Absolutely.
that was a large reason for the move to Hiket. And I just sorry, the
It's-
amount of rancor and argumentation and fighting within the community of coders around the beginning of this year, February, March, around the Ethereum blockchain is nothing I've ever experienced before in my long years of doing this. It was really upsetting, really difficult, really complicated. And I think it was, yeah, anyway, that's some thoughts about that.
Super cool. Okay, I'm going to read more about the that ticket monk thing. Cool. I've got two more questions here. So I don't know how much time you have, Casey. By the way, you said that you're quite busy, and you.
I think it's
I
like
don't want to.
whatever works for you in this broadcast. I had kind of assumed about a half hour, but we can
That's
keep it
great.
shorter or go a bit longer. It's totally up to you.
Perfect. Great. Okay, so if you could go back and change something about the fundamentals of processing, what would it be?
What an easy question. Oh my goodness. Um, it's really rough.
That's not my.
I don't think there's any one thing. I think there's
Mm-hmm.
maybe hundreds of small things.
Mm-hmm.
Calling the Boolean mouse press the same as the event function mouse pressed, that was a bad decision.
Mm-hmm.
Calling, draw used to be called loop.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was good as a loop because that's what it does. It loops. But
Yeah.
I don't remember how many years in we changed it to draw just because we really wanted to emphasize like this is where you draw stuff. I think
Mm-hmm.
that
Mm-hmm.
was maybe not a good decision
Mm-hmm.
because you can of course draw in other places and other kinds of functions that are called from draw and event functions. I
Mm-hmm.
think having the color function the same as the color data type name, I think that was not the best move. I mean, for me, there's a long list of those kinds of things, but I don't know about any like one one critical mistake.
That's very interesting because all the things you just mentioned, I take them for granted, and that I just thought that this is the right way to do it. And it's so interesting that you say that you also have concerns about some things that you would do
Yeah,
different.
yeah. And when I every time I teach it, I cringe a little. But I try not to go into like a long tangent with my lovely students who are patient with me.
Uh-huh.
One thing happened really early on is like Ben Fry and I became total bottlenecks to things happening, to things evolving and growing.
Yeah.
And so putting in the library system was a really big moment for processing because that allowed anybody to own a part of the project, to do it autonomously and independently, and then to dock into the main project. I think when we when we made the jump to 2.0, that was really painful. We just felt like we needed to change a number of things about the library.
Mm-hmm.
About how libraries work internally to make that work better. And as a result, it broke a lot of the libraries. And I think we burned a lot of goodwill in the community and of the people making libraries as a result.
Okay.
And I would say that was hard.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of backlash around that. It was a lesson learned. And so for processing 3, processing 4, we've really prioritized backwards compatibility and making sure that we don't fundamentally break things. I think maybe the flip side of that is something that I think we did well. I can more or less open up source code that I wrote in 2001 and more or less it runs. I might need to like tweak or change just a couple little things.
Mm-hmm.
That's really been a priority we've had from the very beginning. I think
Yeah.
one personal regret that I have, just to share openly and bubbly with the community, is like I'm always running my studio, running, co-organizing processing with Ben Fry, and always with a large group of other wonderful people too. Dan Schiffman has been really essential to the project. Andreas Kalubri, Andreas Schlegel, Florian Yennet. There's been so many people that have just been absolutely essential to the project over the years. But anyway, so processing, running my studio, and also teaching at UCLA, I feel like I just haven't had the space and energy to really dedicate to the community. And at times, people were doing amazing things internationally with processing. And I feel like Ben and I just didn't have the bandwidth to recognize that and to reach out and be in community with people. And that's something I'm really trying to do a better job with at the moment.
Wow, that's cool. So, isn't it very overwhelming? I mean, developing a software like this, I mean, it's super complex. Teaching at the same time and also doing art. And I don't know if you do design work, but I mean, that must be a lot of stuff to do, right? How do you structure that?
Yeah, I don't structure it well. I just kind of work myself to death, and I binge different things. You know, academic schedule allows me to like sort of put down teaching for a few months and just really focus on other things.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
So, and I see Ben just putting, so much effort into the development at GitHub, and I just see that he just does so many commits there. I mean, isn't this something that it breaks, or just it must be so much work for him, right? I guess it's very very difficult to, you know, run the studio and at the same time develop processing with all these,
Yeah,
commits
maybe
and.
maybe to your question, what did we do? Like one regret. Um, so I don't know how many people know that, but we started the Processing Foundation in 2012 as
Mhm.
a way to like hold the copyright for the software, as a way to be able to handle money. Until 2012, everything was 100% volunteer effort.
Wow.
Zero of any currency was exchanged at all. I mean, we got a couple grants to commission different people to write different parts of the library, but um, yeah, really. So we started the foundation, have been building that. We now have, I think it's 7 part-time employees on payroll with the foundation, doing
Mhm.
development, also doing community work, also doing like administrative grants writing and that kind of work. But with the foundation, I've been working, we've been working more and more closely with other people, and watching what P5 watching how P5 has evolved and how
Mhm.
Lauren Lee McCarthy's managed that project has just been so wonderful to watch. And I've learned so much from the people that I work with at the foundation, from
Mhm.
Dorothy, from Johanna, from Lauren, from Saber. Um,
Mhm.
and I guess where I'm going with this is that Lauren really early on was able to kind of like, um, through her wonderful way, able to bring more people in to be essential collaborators to the project. And I
Mhm.
think Ben and I have never figured out how to do that. 20 years later, Ben's still making, the majority of the code commits. We're
Mhm.
still stressing over the releases. And so I think there's a lot that of course, not just processing, not Ben and myself, but every emerging open source, free Libre open source software in the creative coding community projects can learn from how Lawrence managed P5.
Absolutely. So I just observed that in the last years, and now I also observed GitHub, and I see that Lauren is just also working so hard on just putting all these commits into the system. It's crazy. It must be a crazy amount of work, right? And I really have so much respect for that.
Yeah. And Lauren worked so hard that she really needed to take a step back, and she recognized
Mm.
that.
Mm.
And now Shin and Q are leading the P5JS community, and it's in very good
Yeah.
hands with them, and they're doing, a great job.
Do you think, I mean, you already answered this question a bit, but do you think that handing over let's say, the leadership of the development of P5JS works in the long term, or do you think it's better if there's really one or two persons that basically do that? What do you think?
It's who knows.
Who knows?
It's an exciting experiment, and we think it will work. I hope it will work. It, I mean, when we first started talking about it, it seemed too risky. But the more and more we did it, like an extraordinary committee of, I think it was around 15 people, um, created an open call, interviewed different candidates. It really worked.
Hmm.
So I feel confident about that process. Yeah.
Cool, great. Okay, I've got one last question for you. So, how do you perceive creative coding work from Europe compared to the work from people doing creative coding in America?
Your questions are amazing. One thing, so I don't know. Of course, nobody knows this. So processing was born at MIT, but like by the time we actually released the first version of the software, I was living in Europe. I was living in Italy. I was teaching at the Interaction Design Institute of Reas, which is which is north of Turin. And so processing was really born in the United States and in Europe simultaneously. And a lot of the language was developed and tested in workshops. Like I would travel Switzerland, France, Netherlands, and teach workshops like once a month. And I guess, I've been living in Los Angeles 17 years now, so like that connection's been lost. But I think it's just, for me, it was important that it was partially grew up and kind of cut its teeth in Europe. But the other thing is that I feel that it's really important to me that processing is international, that what's happening in India, what's happening in Japan, what's happening in Brazil, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm personally putting a lot of energy into trying to, right now, one thing about the new website is translating it into other languages. Of course, nobody knows this either, but the original processing website was the reference was translated into about 8 different languages. It was in Portuguese, Brazilian, many of the Asian languages. And so over time, we lost that. That was just like something that the project growing and sort of the volunteer process sort of was a casualty of that. So one thing about the new website is that it's completely ready for internationalization. Right now, it's being translated into Spanish as a part of one of our summer fellowships for the Processing Foundation. Europe is so different from, I only lived in Europe 2 years, so I clearly don't understand anything. But one thing that I loved about being in Europe was the open source strength, particularly Spain, Italy, just people feeling really strongly about software being free, libre, open source software, and free software being used more than the Americanized, commercialized kind of open source version. I moved to California. David from Arduino, who is a good friend, Arduino grew out of processing. That's a whole other story. We did like a tour in California, like promoting free software, Arduino, and processing, and it just fell on deaf ears. People didn't want to hear about free software in California. I think just the proximity to Silicon Valley and the over commercialization of software. I think that's something that's going on in Europe that is extraordinary. It's also, of course, happening a lot in South America, but it's kind of non-existent in the US, or it's really lower down on the list of priorities. So that's my main difference.
Cool, awesome. So maybe some last words to the community, to the people watching the stream.
Yeah, well, I'd love to say thank you to Design Systems International, to Rune and Martin and Esteban and the whole crew there who made the new processing website. I also want everybody to know that was a complete volunteer effort. Their entire studio for more than a year, in between projects, worked on that, donated the entire thing. It's been the most significant, I would say, labor donation and skill donation to processing in its history. And it's just such good work. Yeah. So I'm just completely thrilled about that. It's also rough around the edges. There's still a lot of broken links, and I'm really trying to clean those up. The 20th anniversary of processing has been completely overwhelming. We've been working really as hard as we can on getting the new site out. Another thing about the new site, there was about 12 volunteers that ported all of the content from the original site into the new site, moving things from XML to Markdown, upsizing images from like 100 pixels to 600 pixels. That was a tremendous amount of work. And they're all listed on the processing website under the people page. Like you can see that list of people. So I think at the 20th anniversary, that crew deserves a huge thank you as well. Here's my message. Processing, I think the 20th anniversary of this moment is a really good time to celebrate processing. And to focus on it for a brief moment. But processing, of course, is not the only kid on the block. There are so many extraordinary artist-made free software creative coding tools. And the way that I see it is we're all in this together. We've all built this together. And I'm Ben and our approach has never been that processing is sort of the tool. We always use like dozens of different pieces of free software and different coding environments on our projects. I really want to see us in the largest sense, like really build this together. I think there's such a danger of us relying on corporations for our software, for proprietary software. When you're when you're as old as I am and have as many gray hairs as I have, you've
It's starting.
seen, yeah, you've seen people get burned by Adobe twice, like really hard. People who, when I was growing up in making work, everything was being done in Director, and that was proprietary software. It was just completely canned, and so people had a decade of work that now they can't really run anymore. Um, Something, of course, similar more recently happened with Flash. All this time and energy put into that work, and I know people are working on Flash players and runners, but essentially that work, the companies who are making that proprietary software just abandoned the people who've been paying them a lot of money for years to build on their stuff. And so I've written about this, but I think, you know, there's problems with free software. There's problems with proprietary software. I think we need to pick the problems that we can manage the most. And I really hope that us as an arts community can build dozens of tools. We can experiment, we can try things out, we can see what works, and we can support each other in making these tools. It's it's been incredibly hard and difficult to make processing. It's been a struggle. Ben and I have both burned out multiple times. We're stubborn, so we're still here. You know, seeing what you do and the way that you share and promote, seeing like the work of different artists over the years, like Robert Hodgin, Jared Tarbell, Toxie, you know, from the early days, like seeing what people make with the stuff. That's what makes this all worthwhile. And yeah, I really want to de-emphasize processing and emphasize what we can do as a community in making our own tools and supporting each other in making our own tools. That's my 20th anniversary soapbox.
Amazing, Casey. Yeah, I can't tell you how much I appreciate your work, and also I appreciate that you just came to this event and appeared here. It's really a big pleasure to speak to you, and thank you so much for all those words.
100%. I love so much what you're doing. It gives me energy to keep going.
Really? That's
yeah, 100%.
Love to hear that.
Yeah.
Cool. That's amazing to hear. I'm totally, you know, starstruck. That's what Vera said when I said Casey comes to this talk. She said, "My goodness, this is crazy." Yeah, so cool. Thanks, Casey. All the best to Lauren and Ben if you see them. Some greetings, and yeah, thanks for attending, and all the best for future work on processing and everything you do.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Hope to see you again soon.
Bye, Casey. Thanks.
Yep.
Whoa. So crazy. I'm totally, you know, I feel super energized now. That was amazing.